Before we start, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. The fork hung motionless between plate and mouth, caught in that thoughtless transition that comes with privilege. The assumption that everything placed before you is safe, prepared with care, meant to nourish rather than destroy. Then came the voice, not shouted, not announced, just there, cutting through the practiced murmur of expensive dining like a knife through silk. Don't eat that. 2 words, flat, direct, almost rude in a space where every interaction had been choreographed to maintain the illusion of effortless perfection. The man's eyes snapped up from his plate, irritation blooming across his face before he even registered who had spoken. His fork remained suspended, trembling slightly now, not from fear, but from the sheer audacity of being interrupted. The restaurant hummed around them, oblivious. Crystal clinked against crystal. Soft jazz played from hidden speakers. Conversations about nothing important continued in practiced tones. The kind of place where everyone knew their role and stayed in it. Except her. She stood 3 feet from his table, her dark skin gleaming under the warm overhead lights, her body carrying the weight that society had taught her to apologize for since childhood. Her uniform was still crisp, still new enough that the creases from the package were barely worn away. She'd been hired less than 2 weeks ago. Her hands weren't trembling. That's what struck him first. They should have been. Someone in her position, black, fat, new, female, interrupting someone in his position should have been shaking with the awareness of crossing invisible lines. Instead, her eyes held something else entirely, a clarity that unnerved him more than anger would have. "Who the hell do you think you are?" The words came out sharp, reflexive, the tone he used with service workers who forgot themselves, who reached above their station. Speaking to me like that? She didn't flinch, didn't apologize, didn't do any of the things his privilege had taught him to expect from people who looked like her. People in uniforms. People whose paychecks depended on his satisfaction. She just repeated herself, quieter this time, but somehow more insistent. "There's poison in your food." The word should have sounded absurd, melodramatic, the kind of thing that happened in bad television shows, not in 5-star restaurants where a single plate cost more than she probably made in a day. But something in her voice, something calm and certain, made the fork finally drop from his fingers. It clattered against the bone china with a sound that seemed too loud, too final. Around them, the restaurant continued its performance. A couple 2 tables over laughed at some shared joke. A waiter glided past with a tray of wine glasses balanced perfectly on one hand. The pianist transitioned into a Gershwin piece. Normal. All so devastatingly normal. The man stood abruptly, his chair scraping backward with an ugly screech that finally drew attention. Blood rushed to his face, not from fear, but from rage. Pure, unfiltered rage at being made to feel uncertain in his own space, at his own table, by someone who should have been invisible. "It was you, wasn't it?" The accusation came out in a hiss, low enough not to carry but venomous enough to poison the air between them. "You did this. You wanted attention, wanted to make a scene. You people are all the same." He didn't think about what he was saying, didn't filter the ugliness that had always lived just beneath his cultivated surface. The words came from somewhere deep and old, a place where prejudice had nested undisturbed for decades. His hand shot out and shoved her shoulder, not hard enough to knock her down, but hard enough to make his point, hard enough to put her back in what he considered her place. The silence that followed was different from the ambient quiet of expensive dining. This was the silence of held breath, of witnesses who didn't know if they should intervene or pretend they hadn't seen. Other staff members froze mid-motion. A busboy clutched his gray tub of dirty dishes, eyes wide. The hostess at the front desk stared, her professional smile finally cracking. Some looked at her with pity. Others looked away too quickly, as if violence against someone they worked beside was somehow contagious, something that might spread if acknowledged. She absorbed the shove with surprising steadiness, her body swaying slightly but her feet remaining planted. For a moment, just a heartbeat, something flickered across her face. Not fear, not even anger. Something more like profound sadness. as if she'd hoped for better but wasn't surprised by worse. Then she took a breath, deep and deliberate, drew her shoulders back, lifted her chin, and did something nobody in that room expected. She pulled her phone from her pocket. Part 2. Who's afraid of the truth? Her fingers moved across the screen with practiced precision. Not frantic, not uncertain. Someone who knew exactly what she was doing. "Police," she said, her voice carrying now, projecting across the dining room with unexpected authority. "And I need a private detective. Now." The words landed like stones in still water, rippling outward. Conversations stuttered to a halt. Heads turned. The piano player's fingers stumbled over the keys before falling silent. The man stared at her, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and finally settling on incredulous laughter. "You've lost your mind." He looked around at the other diners as if recruiting them to witness this absurdity. "You're going to accuse me? Here? In my restaurant?" His restaurant. He said it like ownership was a shield, like the deed to the property could protect him from consequences. She lowered her phone but didn't put it away, just held it loosely at her side, ready. When she met his eyes this time, she didn't look down first, didn't defer. The hierarchy he'd assumed was absolute suddenly seemed negotiable. "No," she said simply. "I'm going to let the truth speak." Something in her tone, the absolute certainty of it, made his laughter die in his throat. The manager appeared then, sweating despite the climate control, his face a mask of professional panic. "Sir, I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding. Perhaps we can discuss this in the—" "There's nothing to discuss," she interrupted, not rudely but firmly. "Call the police. Check the cameras. Test the food. Or I will." The manager's eyes darted between them, calculating social hierarchies, weighing consequences, trying to navigate waters that had suddenly become treacherous. "You're fired," the man snapped at her, grasping for control. "Security, get her out of here." "I don't think so." A new voice, calm and measured. The owner, the actual owner, the one whose name was on the liquor license and the health permits, had emerged from the kitchen. He was older, gray-haired, wearing a suit that probably cost more than a month of her salary. "Nobody moves until we sort this out." He looked at her, then at the untouched plate still sitting on the table, then back at her. "You're serious about this?" "Yes, sir." "Then we wait for the police." The minutes that followed felt elastic, stretching and compressing. Some diners left, uncomfortable with the scene unfolding. Others stayed, morbidly curious. The man paced like a caged animal, alternating between indignation and performative disbelief. "This is insane," he muttered, loud enough to be heard. "I've eaten here every Tuesday for 3 years. Same table, same staff. And suddenly this woman decides to pull some stunt?" She remained still, standing near the entrance now, her back straight, waiting. "You know what this is about, don't you?" He addressed the room now, playing to an audience. "She's angry. Probably overheard something she didn't like. Maybe got reprimanded for something. And this is revenge. This is what happens when you hire people who—" "Sir," the owner's voice cut through the monologue like a blade. "I'd advise you to stop talking." When the police arrived, 2 officers looking tired and faintly annoyed at being called to a restaurant dispute, the atmosphere shifted again. Official now, real consequences hovering in the air like humidity before a storm. "Does someone want to tell me what's going on?" the older officer asked, surveying the scene with the practiced weariness of someone who'd broken up countless petty disputes. Everyone started talking at once. The man's voice rose above the others. "This employee is making false accusations. She's clearly unstable. I want her arrested for—" "He shoved me and called me a liar," she said quietly, but clearly. "After I warned him his food was poisoned. I'm requesting that plate be tested and that you review the security footage from the kitchen." The officer's expression changed. Not dramatic, just a subtle recalibration from annoyance to attention. "Poisoned?" "Yes, sir." "And you know this how?" I saw it happen. 43 minutes ago. 3 staff members in the prep kitchen. I can identify them." The second officer was already on his radio, calling it in. Within minutes, the plate had been carefully moved to an evidence bag. The kitchen had been sealed, and a detective was on the way. The man watched this unfold with growing unease, his bluster slowly deflating. This is ridiculous. You're actually taking her seriously? We take all allegations seriously, sir. While they waited for the detective, the man couldn't seem to stop talking. Words spilled out of him like he could construct a reality through sheer volume. I've always known, he said to anyone who would listen. People like this always try to bring down successful people. It's jealousy. It's resentment. She probably heard me say something she didn't agree with and decided to ruin my reputation. She said nothing, just stood there, hands folded, watching him unravel. The detective who arrived was younger than expected, sharp-eyed, carrying a tablet. She introduced herself as Detective Martinez and got straight to business. I need to see your security footage. All of it. Kitchen, dining room, staff areas. The owner nodded, already pulling out his phone to contact the security company. And I need statements from everyone who was in the kitchen during the lunch shift. It took 20 minutes to pull up the footage. During that time, the man grew quieter, his face losing color. He kept glancing at the woman who'd started all this, as if trying to understand what game she was playing, what angle she could possibly have. Then the video began to play. Part 3, Images Don't Lie. The tablet screen glowed in the dimmed restaurant, now closed to additional customers. Those who remained, the man, the woman, the owner, the police, and a handful of staff members who couldn't leave, gathered in a loose semicircle. Detective Martinez scrubbed through the footage methodically, her expression neutral, but her eyes missing nothing. Here, she said, stopping at 11:47 a.m. The kitchen on screen looked like organized chaos, the normal controlled frenzy of lunch service. Flames leaping from pans, steam rising from pots, orders being called out, bodies moving in practiced choreography. Then the image shifted to a quieter corner, the prep area, away from the main line. 3 men stood close together, heads bent. One of them kept glancing toward the door. The body language was wrong, furtive, secretive. This wasn't normal kitchen communication. Martinez turned up the volume. The kitchen noise made it hard to hear, but fragments came through. Think he owns everyone. Said it right to Garcia's face. A harsh laugh. Today he learns. The man watching the screen leaned forward, squinting. That's Ramirez and Johnson. They've worked here for years. What are they? Then the image showed it. Clear and undeniable. Johnson pulled a small container from his pocket. The camera caught the moment perfectly. The deliberate pour into the sauce being prepared, the quick stir to incorporate it, the satisfied nod. No hesitation, no doubt. The movement of someone who'd made a decision and committed to it fully. The watching room went silent except for the ambient noise from the video. Ramirez's voice came through now, clearer. Special plate for the Tuesday regular. Extra everything. They laughed. Actual laughter. Like it was funny. Like poisoning someone was a punchline to a joke only they understood. The man watching, the intended victim, made a sound like he'd been punched. Jesus Christ. Keep watching, Martinez said quietly. The timestamp moved forward. The plate being finished with unnecessary care, garnished perfectly. Johnson carrying it out himself instead of sending it with a server, making sure it went to exactly the right table. The smile on his face as he set it down. Then, minutes later, another figure entered the frame. Her. She'd been in the kitchen office, apparently. The small room where staff hung their coats and the manager did paperwork. The camera caught her emerging, her face troubled. She clearly heard something. The angle showed her processing, deciding. She could have walked away. Should have, by any measure of self-preservation. She was new, black, female, carrying every disadvantage that made speaking up dangerous. The smart play would have been silence. Instead, the video showed her taking a breath and walking straight out to the dining room, straight to his table. The detective paused the video again and turned to the man. Recognize the plate? He nodded, unable to speak. And you pushed her when she tried to warn you? Another nod, smaller this time. Shame was beginning to creep across his features, fighting with confusion for dominance. Martinez turned to the woman. And you are Keisha Williams. I started here 2 weeks ago. Today was my first day in the kitchen rotation. Why were you in the office? Keisha's expression remained steady, but something flickered in her eyes. Pride, maybe, or vindication. I'd been called in. The owner wanted to speak with me. All eyes turned to the owner, who nodded slowly. I was promoting her, he said quietly, to kitchen supervisor. She'd impressed me with how she handled a supply chain issue last week. Caught a major problem before it became a crisis. I was explaining her new responsibilities when he gestured at the screen. The detective looked back at the frozen image of Keisha, standing in the doorway of the office, her face showing the moment she understood what she'd just overheard. So you had just been given authority in the kitchen, Martinez clarified, and your first action was to prevent a murder, even though it meant accusing staff members who outranked you in seniority. It wasn't about rank, Keisha said simply. It was about doing what was right. The man, the one who'd shoved her, insulted her, accused her, stood frozen. His face had gone through several colors, finally settling on a grayish pale that looked almost green under the restaurant lights. His voice cracked. I thought, what did you think, sir? Martinez's tone was professional but not unkind. She'd clearly seen this before, the moment when someone's assumptions crumbled and they were forced to see reality. I assumed, he couldn't finish. How do you explain that you assumed malice because of someone's skin color? That you projected villainy onto someone who was literally saving your life? You thought wrong, Martinez said flatly. She nodded to the officers who moved toward the kitchen. Within minutes, Ramirez, Johnson, and a third man Martinez had identified in the video were being led out in handcuffs. They didn't fight it. Johnson kept his eyes on the floor. Ramirez shot Keisha a look of pure hatred as he passed. Snitch, he muttered. She didn't respond, didn't engage, just watched them go with an expression of profound sadness. After they'd been taken away, Martinez turned back to the man. We'll need a formal statement from you, sir. And she glanced at Keisha, then back at him. I'd suggest you think very carefully about your own actions here today. Are you pressing charges? The owner asked Keisha, his voice gentle. She was quiet for a long moment, looking at the man who'd assaulted her, who'd spewed racist assumptions, who'd tried to have her fired for saving his life. He stood there, diminished somehow. Not physically. He was still tall, still well-dressed, still carrying all the markers of privilege and power, but something essential had shrunk. The confidence that came from never being questioned, never being wrong, never facing consequences. Not today, Keisha finally said, but I want it on record. All of it. Martinez nodded approvingly. Smart. And sir? She addressed the man directly. If I were you, I'd be very grateful right now, and very apologetic. But he couldn't speak, could only stare at Keisha with an expression that mingled horror, shame, and something that might have been the first stirrings of understanding. The detective closed her tablet. We'll be in touch with all of you. The restaurant will need to stay closed pending the investigation, at least for today. As people began to disperse, the man remained rooted to the spot, watching Keisha gather her things. She moved with quiet dignity, her movements economical and purposeful. Before she could leave, he found his voice. Wait, please. She paused but didn't turn around. I need to... He swallowed hard. Can we talk? Not now, but soon? I need to... Need to what? Her voice wasn't hostile, just tired. So tired. Apologize. Properly. Not here, not like this. But I need you to know that The words failed him again. She finally turned, and the look she gave him contained multitudes. Exhaustion, disappointment, a weary kind of resignation that spoke to experiences he'd never had to face. You need to know something, she said softly. I didn't do this for you. I did it because a human being was about to be murdered and I could prevent it. That's all. I understand. Do you? There was no anger in the question, just genuine curiosity. Do you really? He didn't answer because they both knew he didn't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But the question itself was a gift, an invitation to actually examine the assumptions that had shaped his entire worldview. Keisha picked up her bag and walked toward the door. Before she left, she turned back one more time. Those men did what they did because of things you said. Things you've probably been saying for years. Maybe you should think about that. The door closed behind her with a soft click. Part 4, the debt that can't be paid with money. The restaurant reopened 3 days later after intensive investigation and staff restructuring. The kitchen was thoroughly cleaned, protocols were reviewed, and new security measures were implemented. The owner issued a statement about maintaining the highest standards of safety and integrity. But the man who usually sat at the corner table every Tuesday didn't return. Not immediately. He spent those days in a state he'd rarely experienced. Genuine self-reflection. Not the performative kind that came with expensive therapy sessions where he complained about stress and pressure. Real, uncomfortable examination of who he was and how he moved through the world. The investigation revealed that Ramirez had been planning the poisoning for weeks, ever since the man had made a particularly cruel comment about the kitchen staff during a private party. He'd referred to them as the help, with such disdain that it had sparked something dark. Johnson and the third man, a prep cook named Santos, had joined the plot after witnessing additional slights and insults over the months. The man read the police reports with growing horror. Not because he didn't remember saying those things, he did vaguely in the way you remember background noise, but because he'd never considered that words had power, that cruelty accumulated, that human beings only tolerate being dehumanized for so long before something breaks. He'd built his entire life on certain assumptions, that he was superior by virtue of his race, his wealth, his position, that people who served him were fundamentally different, less worthy of consideration, that his comfort and preferences mattered more than their dignity. Keisha Williams had exposed all of that in a single moment of simple human decency. On the 8th day after the incident, he called the restaurant and asked for her number. The owner hesitated. "She's been through enough," he said carefully. "I'm not sure she wants to hear from you. I understand, but I need to apologize. Face to face. Not for my benefit, for hers. She deserves to hear it." There was a long pause. "I'll ask her. If she says yes, I'll pass along her contact information. If she says no, you respect that. Understood?" "Understood." 2 days later, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Coffee. Thursday, 2 p.m. The diner on Maple Street. Don't be late." He arrived 15 minutes early, nervous in a way he hadn't been since job interviews in his 20s. The diner was the kind of place he'd never voluntarily enter. Vinyl booths, laminated menus, coffee served in thick ceramic mugs. Working class, unpretentious, completely outside his normal orbit. Keisha arrived exactly on time, sliding into the booth across from him. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back. Without the uniform, she looked younger, softer, but her eyes still held that same clarity. "Thank you for meeting me," he started, but she held up a hand. "Let me be clear about something first," she said. "I'm not here to make you feel better about yourself. I'm not here to absolve you. If you want forgiveness, talk to a priest. I'm here because you asked, and because I think you might actually be capable of learning something." The word stung, but he nodded. "Fair enough." A waitress came by, an older woman with tired eyes and a professional smile. She poured coffee without asking, the kind of assumption about what customers wanted that came from decades of experience. After she left, Keisha spoke first. "Do you know why they tried to kill you?" "I read the reports, things I said, the way I treated people. That's the surface. But do you understand why those things mattered enough to make men willing to commit murder?" He shifted uncomfortably. I was disrespectful, rude. You were dehumanizing." She said it matter-of-factly, like a diagnosis. "Every Tuesday for 3 years, you came to that restaurant and treated the staff like furniture. Useful when needed, invisible otherwise. You didn't learn their names, didn't acknowledge their presence unless something was wrong. Complained loudly when service wasn't perfect, never said thank you when it was. I tipped well. Money isn't respect." Her tone remained even, but there was steel underneath. "You tipped well because it reinforced your sense of generosity, not because you valued them as human beings. And when you did speak to them, It was with contempt. Little comments about intelligence, work ethic, appearance. You thought you were being funny or honest. They heard someone telling them they were worthless. He wanted to argue, to defend himself, but the words died in his throat because she was right. He'd thought tipping 25% made up for everything else. That financial generosity somehow balanced out casual cruelty. Ramirez has 3 kids, Keisha continued quietly. Works 60 hours a week, sends money back to his mother in Ecuador. Johnson is putting himself through culinary school at night. Santos is saving to bring his wife over from the Philippines. These aren't abstract people. They're human beings with dreams and families and dignity. And you made them feel like nothing. I know. I'm beginning to understand. Are you? She leaned forward slightly. Because here's what I want you to really sit with. I saved your life, and your first instinct was to assault me, to accuse me, to assume I was the threat. Why? The question hung in the air between them. He could feel his face heating up, shame crawling up his neck. Because you're black. He forced the words out, owning them. Because you're a woman. Because you were new and I don't know what I thought. That you wanted attention. That you were trying to cause problems. I saw you and I made assumptions based on... He couldn't finish. Based on racism, she completed calmly. You can say it. That's what it was. Yes, the admission hurt, but also brought a strange relief. I'm racist, or I was. I don't know how to... You still are, she interrupted. This isn't past tense. Racism isn't something you do and then stop. It's a system you've benefited from your entire life. It's assumptions baked so deep you don't even notice them. And you don't stop being racist just because you had one moment of clarity. He absorbed this, letting it settle. Then what do I do? You do the work. She took a sip of her coffee, considering. Real work. Not performative allyship or guilty hand-wringing. You examine every assumption. You speak up when your peers say the kinds of things you used to say. You use your privilege to actually change systems instead of just benefiting from them. And you accept that you'll make mistakes and cause harm even when you're trying not to. And you keep going anyway. I want to do that. Why? The question caught him off guard. Because it's right. Because I almost died, and you saved me and I was horrible to you and I need to be better. She shook her head slowly. Those are all about you. About your guilt, your near-death experience, your need to feel like a good person. I'm asking why you actually care about changing, not just about feeling like you've changed. He sat with that for a long moment, really thinking. The easy answers, all the ones he'd prepared on the drive over, suddenly felt hollow. I don't know, he finally admitted. Maybe I don't yet. Maybe that's something I need to figure out. For the first time, Keisha smiled slightly. Not warmth exactly, but acknowledgement. That's the first honest thing you've said. They sat in silence for a while, drinking coffee that had gone lukewarm. The diner hummed with normal lunch activity around them. Conversations, clattering dishes, the hiss of the griddle. Life continuing, indifferent to their small moment of reckoning. I pushed you, he said eventually. Publicly. I assaulted you. Why aren't you pressing charges? Because sending you to jail doesn't change anything, she replied. You'd serve your time, pay your fine, and learn nothing except to be more careful about who's watching. I want you to actually change, not because you're afraid of consequences, but because you understand why it matters. That's remarkably generous. It's not generosity, it's strategy. She set down her mug. The system is designed to protect men like you and punish people like me. Even when you're clearly wrong, even when there's video evidence, there's a good chance you'd get a slap on the wrist while I'd be painted as aggressive or difficult. I'm not interested in playing a game where the deck is stacked against me. But you have every right to... I know my rights. She cut him off, not unkindly. I also know how the world works, and I'm choosing to use my energy differently. He nodded slowly, beginning to understand that her decision not to press charges wasn't about him at all. It was about her own assessment of where her power could be most effectively used. Can I ask you something? He ventured. You can ask. When you heard them planning it in the kitchen, why did you speak up? You barely knew me. You'd just been promoted. You could have just not heard anything. Stayed out of it. Keisha was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee mug. My grandmother used to say that your character isn't defined by what you do when people are watching. It's defined by what you do when no one would ever know. I didn't save you because you deserved it. You probably didn't. I saved you because someone being murdered is wrong, and I had the power to stop it. That's all. That's not all, though. He leaned forward. You risked your job, your safety. You knew I might react exactly the way I did. And you did it anyway. Of course I knew. A sad smile crossed her face. Black women learn early how to calculate those risks. Every single day, we make decisions about when to speak up and when to stay quiet, knowing that either choice could destroy us. I chose to speak because I had to live with myself afterward. Simple as that. The weight of that, the constant calculation, the perpetual risk assessment, hit him like a physical blow. He'd never had to think that way. Never had to measure whether his safety or dignity would be the cost of doing the right thing. I don't know how to make this right, he said finally. You can't, she replied simply. Not completely. Some things don't get fixed. They just get learned from. Then what now? She stood, pulling on her jacket. Now you go back to your life. And when you're sitting at a restaurant, you look at the people serving you and remember they're human. When you hear someone make a joke at someone else's expense, you speak up. When you have hiring power, you use it fairly. When you mess up, and you will, you acknowledge it and do better. That's it? That's everything. She dropped a few bills on the table for her coffee. Small choices, made consistently, over time. That's how people change. That's how the world changes. She started to walk away, then paused. And stop coming to that restaurant every Tuesday. Those men are gone, but the culture you helped create isn't. Give the staff some space to heal without your presence as a reminder. He nodded, understanding. Where should I go instead? Somewhere that makes you uncomfortable, somewhere you're not automatically the most important person in the room. Sit with that discomfort. Learn from it. With that, she left. He sat alone in the booth for another hour, watching the diner's customers come and go. A construction worker grabbing lunch, a woman with 2 kids negotiating over milkshakes, a teenager doing homework in the corner. All of them living lives he'd never considered, facing challenges he'd never had to think about. For the first time in his privileged existence, he felt small, not diminished, not humiliated, just human-sized. Blanchard epilogue. 6 months later, the man, whose name was David Chen, though we've barely used it because he'd spent so long being defined by his position rather than his personhood, stood in front of a community center in a neighborhood he'd previously driven through without stopping. He was here to speak at a restorative justice workshop. Not as an expert, as a participant, as someone with a story about how close he'd come to being a victim while simultaneously being a perpetrator. Keisha Williams was there too, though not because of him. She'd been invited to speak about workplace safety and dignity. She was thriving in her role as kitchen supervisor, implementing new protocols and mentorship programs. The restaurant had changed under her influence, not just safer, but more humane. They acknowledged each other with small nods. Not friends, not exactly, but no longer enemies either. Something more complex and more honest. During the session, David talked about the fork suspended in air, about the moment when everything could have gone differently, about learning that being saved by someone you'd wronged was infinitely more humbling than any punishment could have been. I wanted to pay her back, he told the group. Wanted to give her money, write a check, make a grand gesture, but she taught me that some debts can't be paid with money. They can only be honored through change. Keisha spoke after him, her words measured and powerful. Justice doesn't always look like punishment, she said. Sometimes it looks like education. Sometimes it looks like one person choosing to see another person's humanity, even when they don't deserve it, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. After the workshop, they found themselves walking out at the same time. The evening air was cool, promising rain. You did well in there, Keisha said. I'm trying. Still making mistakes. Still learning. Good. The day you think you figured it all out is the day you stop growing. They stood in companionable silence for a moment. Can I ask you something? David ventured. That day in the diner, you said you saved me because it was right, not because I deserved it. Do you still feel that way? Keisha considered. I think I've refined it. I saved you because every life has value, even lives that have caused harm. You didn't deserve to die for being racist. You deserve to live and do better. And you're trying to do that, which matters. Thank you. Don't thank me, just keep doing the work. Doing. She walked toward her car, and he watched her go. This woman who'd saved his life not despite his cruelty, but in defiance of it. Who'd chosen to invest in possibility rather than punishment. The fork had been suspended in air for just a moment. But in that moment, everything changed. Not because justice had been served in the traditional sense, not because wrongs had been erased or debts had been paid, but because two people, so different, so unequal in a system designed to keep them apart, had encountered each other's full humanity, and chosen, however imperfectly, to honor it. Sometimes justice doesn't thunder. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it's just a woman in a new uniform, speaking two words that save a life. Don't eat that. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we're humble enough to listen. If you like this story, leave a like and subscribe for more.